So that's a little bit about Future Energy Partners, our University of Uganda. I'm now going to turn you over to the beautiful truth. Adam and Elizabeth are going to tell you about the beautiful truth of the oil and energy industry. As many of you know, the industry has an interesting, challenging reputation. I would claim mainly that reputation is because we tend to operate in countries which are remote, struggling financially, have a variety of stakeholders, some government, some communities, some NGOs, and so it's quite difficult to bring all these people together and support. And we also should recognize that the energy industry is essential to the way we live. You can't heat your home or cool your home or turn the lights on and off without energy in some form or other. And more, our industry is now moving into renewable energies more, looking at how we can reduce waste. Flaring and venting is a common issue that everyone pays attention to, but there's many other things we can do to improve the quality and reliability and the cost of the energy that we provide. So we've heard a little bit about that from P and Jill in previous sessions, and you'll see if you follow the news at all, a lot of companies, especially in Europe, are really now setting out to try and help the industry be part of achieving Paris goals of carbon neutrality this century. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the beautiful truth, and let's hear what they have to say for us. So Adam and Elizabeth, off you go.
Brilliant. Thank you, Greg. So having not done this before, do we have now control of the slides?
You do, yes.
We do. Okay, great. So, got it. Great. So I'll start by giving you a little bit about us. So the beautiful truth is a fairly new company, but it was born out of Connected Pictures. Connected Pictures was founded in 2002, and we still do video content for lots of different brands and businesses. But where we found that we were having the most impact was in brands and businesses that affect the globe, affect communities, affect societies in different ways around the world in very particular ways. I'll give you sort of a potted history of clients. ArcelorMittal was one of our first clients, mining and metals, and we've been working them since before they were even ArcelorMittal, when they were L&M Holdings, before they became Mittal, and then subsequently when Mr. Mittal and Arcelor merged. We've done several bits of content and communications over many years that look at how, as a business, they are impacting the world. SAB Miller, we were involved in their sustainable development priorities back in 2008 and communicating those, speaking to people such as Lord Brown, Patience Wheatcroft, Dame Barbara Stocking about the role of business in society. Suncor Energy, we were involved in the rebranding of Suncor Energy to Suncor back in 2016 and communicating that to different stakeholders. The question that we ask most is, why do you do what you do? We're very interested in this human angle of why do people do what they do? Why do businesses do what they do? Because the two are interlinked. Businesses are made up of people. If we don't understand what each person is bringing to the table and why they're making the choices that they make, then we can't move the needle on things like social needs and climate change. And so we set up The Beautiful Truth. The Beautiful Truth is an editorial platform that encourages people to explore the aspects of purpose that are becoming common, because they're not as simple as everybody likes to make out. It's not about just saying we're now a purpose-driven company and everyone accepting it. It's very nuanced. And so the editorial, which we'll come on to talk about a bit later, looks at that. TBT then consults on helping people to do it, and we work with everybody from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation through to Glencore. And then Connected Pictures tell stories about it. So that's how it breaks down. You can see a few more of the clients. that we work with on a day-to-day basis here. Do you want to pick up on anything on that, Liz?
No. I think it's just worth framing that the presentation today we've centered on storytelling. We've centered it around film and video to make it tangible, hopefully, and obviously relate to social media and communicating remotely or digitally, depending on how you define those things. But it's obviously broader than that. And I think the principles around storytelling and engaging people emotionally are what we'll center on, but they will apply to other mediums as well. So there'll be time for questions at the end around that.
Great. So we have an ethos. In fact, The Beautiful Truth started as an ethos. It started as an internal thing to galvanize ourselves around our why and what we wanted to bring into the world. And so this was the initial ethos, which covered all the different parts of the company, the central point of which is really this middle line. It's about helping companies understand what makes them tick as human beings first and as companies second. Companies, especially in heavily regulated industries, like to talk about proof points, percentages, growth areas, what they are and aren't doing, but it's really the galvanizing the people at the heart of that which becomes most important. And that doesn't matter which stakeholder group you're aiming at, whether it's within the company or shareholders or journalists or the industry or any other. A snapshot of our work so you can get a sense of what The Beautiful Truth feels like.
I like the idea of stories. It's about community, it's about interaction, it's about sharing.
Just a matter of showing each other the other person's perspective.
Doing something risky feels like the sensible thing to do to me.
It's not even about it being a itchy job for me. It's about just being a human being.
I think designing for the world that we want to live in means we ask ourselves, what is the right? What is the wrong? What is the good? What is the bad? What is the beautiful?
You see inspiration everywhere, and I think it changes your way of seeing.
It's really all about pushing ourselves to do something different, something new, something impactful in a meaningful way.
Once you start exploring your own adventurous attitude, you realise that's a journey that will go on and on forever.
So that's a mix of the kind of projects that we work with, and we end up working with everybody from the UN to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as I said, through to companies like Glencore or Pfizer. We always take the same approach, which is really understanding true purpose, and by that we mean not something that's a slogan, but something that's authentic to the business. Anybody who read the FT this weekend will know there was an article on Thales's new purpose, which was so broad that it didn't feel relevant to the business. And that's the kind of thing that we try to avoid. We try and, in our work, make sure that the people who are driving the business can get behind what's there, rather than it just be something that's out there, that's fulfilling some objective or regulatory requirement. We base that in human behaviors. And with connected pictures, we connect the two through beautiful films. And that's really the end of where we'll talk about us, and we'll get on to things that are useful, hopefully, to you and in your craft and what you're trying to achieve in the world. And this is really where we start. So we think of the audience, no surprise there. We think of the mindset that they have. And then where do we want them to be? And this is the bit that often then gets missed out. It's the context for watching. because different contexts, and again, we're focusing primarily here on video content, different context means that somebody is more or less receptive to what it is you're trying to say to them. And because they're more or less receptive to what you're trying to say to them, they're more or less receptive to video content. So understanding that context and their journey to that content then starts to inform the kind of video, the content that you want to make, how long it is, how emotional it is, and all the other factors that go into a creative idea. Do you want to see this?
Yeah, so we look, especially when it comes to social media campaigns, at a funnel. It mirrors the typical sales funnel, which I'm sure you'll be all familiar with. But we talk about moving people from sort of being unaware through to belief and advocacy. Because I think ultimately what we're trying to do more often than not with films is communicate ideas rather than get people to purchase things. This is about trust or engagement more than anything else. And so what we would really urge you to think about in your work and where best to use these things is, where are people on this funnel of belief? And that will differ. It might not be a simple demographic split or anything that's particularly easy actually to target online. But if you can break your audience down by the funnel of belief, what you can start to do is see where you need short teasers and trailers for the cohorts which sit at awareness or even unaware, to pique curiosity and draw people through that funnel through down to longer form content towards the middle and through to advocacy. And what we actually find, and we'll go on to talk about this in a bit more depth, is thinking about things in categories or categorical terms around length isn't the right way to approach it. And so we'll talk to you a bit about that as well.
So this is from one of our favorite thinkers, who's a professor at the Stern School of Business, a guy called Jonathan Haidt. If you have a chance to look him up, he writes incredible books and papers. One that's particularly useful maybe to you guys is something called The Righteous Mind. Thank you, Liz. The Righteous Mind, which is about the concepts of right and wrong, and how we can paint people into a corner by thinking that they're wrong or ethically unsound, and how we can change that kind of thinking. And he says the human mind is a story process and not a logic processor. You can give people logical arguments for why something's right and something's wrong, but that won't take hold. The emotion and the story is what's key here. And without that, the emotions aren't engaged. And if the emotions aren't engaged, it's very difficult to take people to the next step. This is particularly poignant when it comes to trust issues and places where people have to overcome a lack of trust. If you give people a logical argument as to why they should trust your business or your brand or your activity, it won't work. But if you can engage the emotions, if you can tell the story around it, then you can start to make headway. And we use this as an example. This comes from a government report from 2008, raising the issue of child well-being in America. In USA in 2008, healthcare spending was at 15.4% GDP, #1 in the world. In child well-being, it ranked number 12, behind Greece, Poland, and Czech Republic. That's the fact and logic-based approach to the story. This is the emotional-based approach. This is Diamante Driver. He was 12 years old when he died of a toothache. His parents didn't have the relevant health insurance for a dentist. The bacteria from an abscess in his tooth spread to his brain and killed him. This happened in the richest country in the world, not far from that country's capital. Now, what happens is the brain can latch on to the story of the individual. It can latch on to the story of this guy. You start subconsciously thinking about, people that you may know of that age, or going to the dentist or the dentist around you, or the fact that this is the richest country in the world. What's the sense that you have of America? What's the sense you have of the capital? And that starts to engage more. And what happens is these kind of stories will stay in your mind longer than the statistic, which I'm sure would have left your mind already.
Yeah, and this is why, you know, we as storytellers intuitively know and believe in the value of emotional storytelling. But I think sometimes it's worth just explaining that it is a biological setup. You know, we're hacking into a system that exists for thousands and thousands of years. And these are the key things. I think probably the most interesting one on here, I'm sure people will have heard of mirroring and the kind of trigger of empathy and imagining, say, 12-year-olds, you know, or dentist experience and neural coupling and so forth. But I think also interestingly is if you want someone to remember something, you need dopamine. They need a physiological response of sorts to remember something. So when you think about changing minds, if people read something like an annual report or an interesting statistic on social media or a social card or a quote or a tweet, they'll forget it unless it's emotional. And obviously that can be used to devious ends when anxiety is played upon. But when hope and positivity are played upon, and we look at human stories which engage positive emotions and dopamine, they'll stay with people longer, and they'll and respectively trust you and be loyal for longer.
And with that in mind, the story that we just shared with you of Diamante Driver and what happened in America started a movement. It changed what they, and by all means, do have a look online for more detail. It changed how they thought about child well-being in America. It changed how they thought about dentistry. It changed how they thought about some of the poorer affected areas of the country, where the treatment that Diamante Driver needed was about $60, and they started to look and change the whole system because of that one story. And obviously, that's not the only example. And you can see what's happened more recently with Black Lives Matter. It wasn't a statistical report of what happened what was happening with the police brutality in America and other countries that changed things. It was one story of one individual, and people's emotions were involved, and change started to happen. And we'll go on to talk more about that later. So we talked about stories and how storytelling affects the brain, but it also works the other way around as well. Is happening in this film. So this is from a psychology test in the 1940s. And it was used basically to test what would go on in people's minds. And they showed it to lots of different types of people. And what they found was that lots of different types of people would tell lots of different types of stories as to what was going on in there. Naturally in your head, even though they're just shapes moving around a screen, you've got an idea of how aggressive it is, how submissive it is, what's actually happening, the violence that may be involved in it, or the peace that's involved in it. And those are shapes moving around a screen. And your brain is trying to process it and make sense of it and create a story around it in a way that has actually nothing to do with what's necessarily going on there. And why does this happen? This happens, as Liz said earlier, because we've evolved this way. We've evolved to listen to the stimulus that's inside our bodies listen to whether we feel good or bad about something, and make up a story in some cases about why that's so. And this process has been very useful for us as we've evolved, because it's kept us alive. You know, attachment and aversion, things that will harm us or help us, are the stories that we have lived by and the stories that have kept us alive for generations. But very often it starts the other way around. And this is what people don't realize. Very often it starts with the emotion. Kahneman obviously did a lot of work around this. You have a snap judgment about something, and then you will post-rationalize why you came to that decision, rather than the logic informing the decision itself. And this becomes very important with what we do, because a lot of what we do with the films we make is about those stories that people are telling themselves subconsciously. It's not about necessarily what's being said on screen, but how something's being said and the subconscious aspects of it. And so we talk about this. Our expectations shape our reality. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we do, where we work, come to define us. While interacting with a company, a perception and a narrative already exists in our head. Films have the opportunity to shape, guide, and influence that story into something different. Telling an authentic, unseen story, subverting expectations, and planting a seed that will grow for years to come. How do you change perceptions? How do you change perceptions, particularly in oil and energy, when everybody has a sense of what oil and energy is and what it is or isn't doing to the planet? People are coming with a certain amount of expectations. How do you make those change? Has everybody heard of Glencore? So I guarantee that anybody in the oil and energy industry has a perception of Glencore. They have a perception of who they are, how they operate, what they're like inside, what the management are like, what they are and aren't doing. I guarantee it. And interestingly, Glencore, of their own admission, have not been very good at communicating until recently. They have not invested in it. And that is something that's changing, and they're on a path to actually trying to change a lot of things from inside. Watch this film.
I still remember each person that passed away on my watch. And you see the impact of that on the families, that I take that extremely personal.
Tracy was a single mum with a young daughter. She was 30 years old at the time. In fact, it was a birthday that day. It took the emergency response team 8 hours to remove Tracy from the cab of the truck. And I remember this young girl running back through the hospital, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs, "That's not my mother."
Bei einem Todesfall fühlt man sich ganz klar mitverantwortlich. Man stellt sich vor, wie wäre das, wenn man die Person persönlich kennen würde. Und dann reflektiert man mal ein paar Minuten und merkt, wie wichtig das Thema ist.
The emotion is shame, but it's important for us that we actually get up, dust ourselves off and put that energy back in to make sure that the legacy of that person that never went home is actually making our business better for everybody that's still left.
Across much of our business, we run some very safe businesses. Year after year, we get excellent results. But there have been some operations that have not achieved this of late.
We're here for the long haul, and therefore it's actually setting up strategic priorities with clear expectations. So assets are very clear on what the long-term goal is, and that's about having a zero fatality workforce.
Strong leadership, particularly in safety, is so important. You can't fake it. And if they see that you're not invested in it, they struggle to follow you.
До тех пор, пока мы у себя будем наблюдать печальную статистику, когда бы она ни происходила и на каком активе, мы должны относиться к этому как к признаку, что температура поднимается не из-за того, что это болезнь само собой. Это признак болезни, которую надо лечить.
We can't blame the people that work for us for that safety performance. That comes down to us as leaders of this organization.
Desde el punto de vista de la seguridad, el liderazgo es importantísimo. Tener un liderazgo claro y que privilegie la seguridad ante todo.
the individuals on the ground, if they see their boss cutting corners, then they will have a belief that they can do that as well.
We must care for people. And do not think that you can just say the word. People see right through you.
We have to set ourselves the objective of trending towards zero incidents.
You have to have a personal belief that not injuring people at work is possible, and it is possible.
First of all, you must understand why people do what they do. You know, it's not blaming the people for doing something wrong. It's really trying to understand what the real root causes are.
If you've got a positive and a mature safety culture, then often those behaviour-based issues that people
Учитывая глобальный охват компании и что работаем буквально во всех континентах мира, что как раз мы та компания, которая будет сталкиваться с спецификой всех систем, и исторических, и ментальностей.
And we've got some fantastic practices that if we applied them globally across the group, we would be a world leader in safety.
Well, I'm an optimist. I don't believe there's anything that stops us from moving forward and making this better.
My son is in second year of university. This week he's started his first vacation job in one of our mines. Have we done every single thing that we possibly can to make sure that Jake's going to come out of that mine safely today? Every single person, 150,000 people we have working for us, they are all somebody's son or daughter or brother, sister, mother, father. And we need to think in those terms about every single one of those 150,000 people. That's what needs to drive us.
So that film was obviously about health and safety that we made for Glencore last year. We're subsequently working with them on a whole host of content and activity, codes of conduct, values work that is helping to embed a different culture within the organization. As I said, I think people come with a certain expectation of a company like Glencore and what it's like inside. So to allow these senior leaders to express themselves in their own words and show that they do care, it starts to create that change. The other interesting thing about that, I guarantee you will not remember almost all of the detail that's within it, but you will remember how they spoke, and you'll remember that story at the end about Jake, the guy's son. Is he going to come out alive? And those are the things that will draw the changes that people need to perceive about a company like Glencore. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would add, I think one of the key learnings, especially in the oil and gas sector here, is that, as Adam's rightly pointed out, audiences are coming up something with expectations. Don't ignore those expectations. You know, if we'd produced a film for Glencore suggesting here are the new pillars of their safety strategy and why they're terrifically safe and why they take it seriously, and ignore the fact there are fatalities, it's kind of an insult to the audience. You know, they're coming at it just back to the psychology of trust. It will just double down on not trusting them. And I think you see this a lot. It sort of borders on greenwashing, but you see it a lot, for instance, if an oil company just produces lots of films about solar panels or windmills. It doubles down on people not trusting because you need to meet the audience where they are. If they have expectations about oil, talk about oil.
And this brings us very nicely onto another example that we've got. This is a film that we made for Suncor. That was about Suncor and the environment.
Working for an oil and gas industry. I think when I first started off, I probably had a little internal conflict, you know.
When I was going through my co-ops, I decided that I would never work for an oil and gas company because of that environmental aspect.
Souvent, quand je discute avec les gens à l'extérieur du travail, ils me posent souvent la question à savoir si comment je fais pour travailler pour une pétrolière.
I mean, I had my doubts around what was I really doing.
I was really passionate about the environment, and I wanted to make a difference wherever I could.
And the film goes on from there. We won't share all of it because we're pushed for time. But that's really what Liz is talking about. You know, you need to start where the audience is. If you're going to make a film about an oil company and the environment, you need to address the elephant in the room. And if you address it up front, you open people's minds because you're being authentic. We all have a bullshit barometer. And that bullshit barometer is based on how much we trust or don't trust the brands and businesses that are talking to us. And so by breaking that down, and there are other ways to do it as well, which we'll come on to in a bit, by breaking that down and allowing authenticity to come through and address some of the issues, you can start to change perceptions. You want to see it?
Yeah, so we've indicated and alluded to this a lot, so I don't think I need to dwell on it. But this is where film is really good, and it's really good on social media because you have the ability to empathize with those you're filming, of course. You have sound, you have visuals, you have a real experience that can elicit emotion. And when you change people's emotions, as we say, you can change their opinions.
This is another thing that we talk about a lot, creating that physiological response. This is taken from the brain slide that you saw earlier on. You want to create an emotion. You want to create an emotional response. Strong feelings lead to sharing. They lead to staying in people's minds because of the dopamine pathways that Liz talked about. Weak feelings, contentment, sadness, don't go anywhere. Anger and anxiety and disgust, strong feelings, that will stay in people's minds. It's easier to create a negative strong feeling than it is to create a positive one. Films, communications have to work harder because of the negativity bias, because it's because of what we might miss if we allow something that we don't trust to come through. So you really have to work harder to get people into those strong feelings in the top left-hand quadrant. As you said before, so feeling leads to sharing. When people share things, they share what's given them that emotional response. And again, anger, anxiety, disgust, that stuff spreads so quickly on social media. A fact-based logical argument or a business case won't. So how do you create that emotion in a different way? One of the questions we get asked a lot is, how long should our films be? Typically, people might think that audience engagement works like this, that the longer a video is, the more audience engagement drops off. But in fact, it looks more like this. There is a stable amount of engagement for the first 1 to 2 minutes. Then there's a steep drop off. And then from about 6 minutes onwards, again, it's fairly stable. Now, that doesn't mean that we should all run out and make 20-minute videos. We have to remember that context matters. So if you go back to the funnel, where is your audience? What is their context for watching? How do they reach the film? Will inform you how long your film should be and the kind of things you might want to put in there. So top 5 things, this is the final slide of it. There's one more that just outlines a bit more about us. We encourage people to find a human story that's bigger than the subject or the brand. If you can connect to something that is about a human being, not your business, then you start to create meaningful change. You start to create engagement and you start to create connections where there might not be there. Think about the emotion you want to convey, not the business case you want to make. This is very difficult in regulated sectors. And it's something that we have heated conversations with Glencore because this business case is a much easier place to play, as I said, especially in regulated industries. But the emotion that you want to convey is really what's happening regardless of whether you want it to or not. So to think about that is important. Start where your audience is, not where you wish they were. I think we've covered that enough. I think that makes sense. Consider more than one film, at least a teaser, to maximize impact. It's much more useful to look at that funnel and go, how can I cover as many different parts of it as I can? Because where you really want your audience to be is to be advocates for your brand. So how can we get them there? And more than one film will help you to do that. It gives you more bites of the pie. And this one, be authentic. Really help the people within your company to be authentic. And with that, as much as we can, we encourage people not to use scripts and auto cue. If you're reading an auto cue, all of those subconscious cues that you get as an audience start to fall away. You're saying, I don't trust this person, they're reading to me, they have no belief in what they're saying. So helping people to answer truthfully and authentically in a question-based format is much better. Anything you want to add to that? Thank you very much. This is us. So this is, if you wanted to find out any more about us and the kind of things that we talk and think about, then these are the 3 sites that you can visit. I don't know if we've got time for questions.
We'll be advised.
Working for an oil and gas industry.
I was gonna jump on there. I haven't changed from Greg hasn't turned into a 30-year-old mixed race.
All right.
Yeah, I just thought I'd say that hasn't happened. It wasn't a miracle. But yeah, until Greg's back online, if anyone has any questions, thanks for that presentation, guys. It's really great, and I really love the video content you produce. It's really, really fantastic. And I really like the example of I've never seen actually a video where an energy brand had just come out and said to their staff like their reservations about working for an energy company, because it's the thing everyone thinks when you think about. For me as an outsider, it's something which I think about when I see an advertisement. I always think about that straight away. So it's really quite powerful. So any questions, I think people will drop them into the Q&A, and at the end of the session, if one of you or both you could stick around, it'd be great, and we can try and gather some questions up as and when they come along. So I've just seen Greg pop back online now.
I ask a question, Adam. I'm kind of curious. How long did it take you to persuade your energy companies, Glencore, Suncor, to really dig into this? Because this is quite a commitment that they've made to expose themselves.
Yeah. Suncor wasn't too difficult, actually. That was back in 2012. We were making a whole lot of content around the brand and what the new brand meant. And we talked about several different films that showcase different parts of the business. It is a key challenge to the environment. So it felt like maybe they're really open to talking about that. The people who work there, the people we interviewed, pretty much all have some sort of degree or certification in environmentalism. So it was a natural thing that they wanted to talk about and focus on. In terms of, I do get asked that question. There's another one. Their interventions don't have a reputation. Just because they have a bad past doesn't mean that they can't change. That one was a slightly different one. Do you want to talk about that one, Liz?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. How long did it take us to persuade them?
Or maybe persuade themselves. Maybe that's the...
Yeah, truth be told, I don't think we did. I think there are enough voices and shifts happening in the business that want to. And I think we didn't, which is something, I think is the beauty of documentary making, we didn't lock down a script or a scary creative idea for just talking to leadership. So the level of authenticity you can get and the candor, which I think is what makes it powerful, you don't need to get signed off. It's a documentary. We're just talking to people, and I think in that respect, it wasn't a scary thing to do. And then upon seeing it, it was like, oh, this is actually, this feels right. This is a journey we want to go on anyway.
And I think that, one of the things that we really encourage is to say, look, this is your dollar. You're going to get like a edit anyway. So let's try this and see what happens, where we have come up against some fightback.
And what media do they use, these clients, like Glencore, Suncor?
Using YouTube a lot. So Glencore, you can see that film. You can see on YouTube currently. I think Suncor subsequently is offline now. But I mean, Glencore is a very interesting one. So we've also been making a number of documentaries, long-form documentaries, showing what they are, the impact that they have around the world, specifically focused at targeting some of the criticisms that they have. Because, as you said in the presentation, everybody has a concept, but let's actually show you what's going on there. Let's show you firsthand. Come and meet the people. So we're making these 20 to 30 minute documentaries. One, in fact, both of them, directed by ex-Al Jazeera journalists, to show exactly what's going on there and not shy away from it. So again, it's not, very often you see these films that are, oh, it's wonderful, we're just doing this and it's great. Yeah, but you're ignoring the story that everybody's told themselves before watching this. So let's address that, address it properly. And so by taking a very hard-hitting current affairs journalist out there to lead and direct the films, we're taking a different approach. And that will be shown to invited audiences across Switzerland and different parts of the world.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's very interesting, and I'm sure food for thought for a lot of people.
Should we answer the question on the chat now, or should we wait until...
Are there... I don't know that there are. We have...
Henry's asked a question.
Yeah, there's a one question in Q&A, Greg.
Here we go.
It's a short answer, actually. What metrics of success this is for the Glencore film in this particular case. Reduced fatalities, first and foremost. And then secondly, increased trust in the brand. I think the latter is a longer journey. And I would say we don't often work with people who get metrics right, but I think when clients do get them right, they're lateral. So for instance, if you're looking to increase trust, obviously engagement and shares is good, but that could very much be from the choir, if you will. You're preaching to the choir. That's just your guys who like you anyway. So I think it's more about reduced level of criticism, speed to market with particular messages, I don't know, reduced questioning from investors, particular press angles, or it might be onboarding suppliers and speed of new partnerships, negotiations with NGOs and time duration for that. So I would just say the social media metrics are important, roughly, as an indicator, but the better metrics tend to be lateral in the business.
Yeah, quite difficult to make the connection between watching a documentary and those business outcomes that you're describing there.
Yeah.
How many people would watch one of these videos, do you think, on YouTube? Or Glencore or Suncor video?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the emotional engagement. So we made another film for ArcelorMittal, again about health and safety, actually, that was talking about a specific fatality. And that got thousands of views by people across lots of different industries. Now, the reason that it got, you have to look at, okay, well, why is something successful? People have an interest in the company. People have an interest in health and safety, and there has to be an emotional story there. And that third one is the one that really people miss, especially.